The blood on Tessa Brennan's kitchen floor wasn't hers, but the police wouldn't believe that. She stood frozen in the doorway of her small Chicago apartment, keys dangling from trembling fingers, staring at the crimson pool spreading across the linoleum. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her mind raced through impossible explanations. The apartment had been locked, the windows were intact. Nothing was disturbed except for that spreading darkness that looked too thick, too wrong to be anything but blood. A shadow moved in her peripheral vision. Tessa spun, her back hitting the doorframe hard enough to bruise. A man stood in her living room, emerging from the darkness near her bookshelf, as though the shadows themselves had birthed him. He was tall, impossibly so, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through her curtains. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, and his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Those eyes were crimson. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place, something old and refined. "I had little choice in the matter." Tessa's hand fumbled for her phone, but before she could pull it from her pocket, he moved. One moment he stood across the room, the next he was before her, his cold fingers wrapped gently around her wrist, not bruising, not threatening, but utterly immovable. "Please," he said quietly. "I mean you no harm. The blood is not yours, nor is it mine. But there are those who would see me destroyed, and they will come here seeking me. You are in danger simply because I chose your window as an escape route." "Let go of me," Tessa managed, surprised her voice worked at all. "Get out before I scream." Something flickered across his pale face, almost like respect. "You have courage. Good. You will need it." He released her wrist and stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Alaric Thorne. I am the Vampire King of the Northern Territory, and as of approximately 20 minutes ago, there is a price on my head large enough to draw every hunter and rival within 500 miles to this city." Tessa's laugh came out sharp and slightly hysterical. "Vampire King. Right, of course. Because this day wasn't terrible enough already." She'd been fired that morning. Her supervisor at the coffee shop had called her chronically unreliable, despite the fact that Tessa had covered more shifts than anyone else in the past 6 months. Then her landlord had left a note about raising the rent. Then her mother had called to guilt trip her about missing Sunday dinner. And now there was a beautiful lunatic in her apartment claiming to be vampire royalty while bleeding on her floor. "You don't believe me," Alaric said. It wasn't a question. "I believe you're bleeding," Tessa replied, forcing her voice steady. "I believe you broke into my home. I believe I should call the police. If you do, they will find us both dead within the hour." His crimson eyes held hers. "The ones hunting me will not leave witnesses. They cannot afford to." Why would anyone hunt you? Despite herself, despite every rational instinct screaming at her to run, Tessa found herself curious. There was something about him, something in the way he held himself, proud and ancient and utterly sincere. "Because I refuse to execute an innocent." Alaric moved to her window, peering through the curtain with obvious tension in his shoulders. "One of my own kind fell in love with a human. Our laws forbid it, have forbidden it for centuries. The council demanded I make an example of him. I refused. Now they have declared me unfit to rule and sent assassins to remove me." Tessa processed this, her mind still trying to reconcile the impossible with the evidence before her. "So you're telling me vampires are real, you're their king, and you're currently being hunted by your own people because you wouldn't kill someone for falling in love." An oversimplification, but accurate enough. "Prove it," Tessa challenged. "Prove you're actually a vampire." Alaric turned from the window, and for a moment something dangerous flickered in those crimson eyes. Then he smiled, and Tessa saw his teeth. The canines were definitely longer than they should be, pointed and sharp. But that could be cosmetic, she told herself, even as her pulse quickened. He moved again with that impossible speed, and suddenly he was lifting her, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back. Before she could scream, he'd carried her to the window and stepped through it. They didn't fall. Tessa clutched at his shoulders, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes saw. They were standing on the side of her building, 3 stories up, Alaric's feet planted against the brick as though gravity had simply decided not to apply to him. The city spread out below them, Chicago's lights glittering in the darkness. "Convinced?" he asked softly. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He stepped back through the window with the same fluid grace, setting her gently on her feet. Her knees buckled, and his hand shot out to steady her. "I apologize for the dramatic demonstration," Alaric said, "but we have little time, and I need you to understand the reality of our situation." "Our situation?" Tessa's voice came out as a squeak. "They will have tracked me here. My blood is on your floor. They will assume you are either my ally or my victim, and in either case, they will not let you live." He moved to her kitchen, examining the blood with a critical eye. "I can try to lead them away, but there's no guarantee they will follow." "This isn't happening," Tessa muttered, pressing her hands to her face. "This is a stress dream. I fell asleep on the couch. Any moment now I'll wake up and none of this will be real." "I wish I could offer you that comfort." Alaric's voice was surprisingly gentle. "But I have dragged you into something deadly, and I will not compound my error by lying to you." Tessa lowered her hands, looking at him properly. He stood in her tiny kitchen, this impossible creature who claimed to be a king, and despite the danger, despite the insanity of it all, she saw something in his face that struck her as deeply, genuinely remorseful. "What do we do?" she heard herself ask. "We?" Alaric's eyebrows rose. "There is no we. I will leave, and with luck, they will follow my trail away from here. You said yourself they might not, and you're hurt." She gestured to the blood. "How badly?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation she saw the truth. Whatever wound had caused that much bleeding, it was serious. "Let me see," Tessa said, moving toward him with the same firm confidence she used when her younger brothers scraped their knees. Never mind that this was a vampire king. Never mind that everything she'd believed about reality had just shattered. Someone was hurt, and she'd spent too many years patching up her family to ignore that instinct now. "I will heal," Alaric protested, but he didn't move away as she approached. "Great. You'll heal faster if we stop the bleeding first." Tessa reached for his jacket, a long black coat that looked expensive and old-fashioned. He caught her hand gently. "You should fear me," he said quietly. "You should run." "Probably," Tessa agreed, "but you said I'm in danger either way, so I might as well be useful. Now let me see the wound." For a long moment, Alaric simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he shrugged out of his coat. His shirt beneath was white silk, now stained dark with blood along his left side. Tessa helped him remove it, trying not to think about how her hands were undressing a vampire king in her kitchen, trying not to notice the cold marble perfection of his skin. The wound was a gash along his ribs, deep and angry. It wasn't bleeding as heavily now, but Tessa could see it had been bad. "What did this?" she asked, moving to grab her first aid kit from under the sink. "Silver blade," Alaric replied. "They know our weaknesses well. Does it burn, like in the movies? Like fire in the veins?" But his voice was steady, controlled. "I have endured worse." Tessa cleaned the wound as best she could, trying not to think about how his skin felt beneath her fingers, cold but somehow vital. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, that crimson gaze tracking her every movement. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally. Tessa considered the question as she applied antiseptic. Why was she helping him? Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane, but something deeper, something instinctive, told her he was telling the truth. And if he was telling the truth about being hunted for showing mercy, then she couldn't just abandon him. "Because you didn't have to warn me about the danger," she said finally. "You could have just left and let me deal with the consequences. But you stayed to explain. That tells me you're not as much of a monster as you want me to think you are." "I am exactly the monster you should think I am," Alaric said softly. "I have lived for 8 centuries, Tessa Brennan. I have killed more humans than you could count. I have ruled my kind with an iron fist and shown no mercy to those who defied me. The one time I chose compassion over law, I was branded a traitor." "Then maybe your laws are wrong," Tessa replied, meeting his eyes. "And maybe you're finally figuring that out." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Then Alaric's hand rose, his fingers cool against her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle that Tessa froze. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, "and I am a fool for bringing this to your door." Before Tessa could respond, the lights went out. Alaric moved instantly, pulling her behind him with one hand while his other hand rose in a gesture that looked defensive. Tessa's eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness, but she could sense movement, shapes shifting in the shadows of her apartment. "Alaric Thorne," a voice called out, smooth and cold. "The council demands your presence." "Tell the council I have given them my answer." Alaric's voice had changed, taking on a quality of absolute authority that sent chills down Tessa's spine. "I will not execute Michael for the crime of loving. If that makes me unfit to rule, then find another king." "We have," the voice replied. "Lord Cassius has already assumed command of the Northern Territory. You are to be tried for treason and dereliction of duty. Surrender, and the human will be spared." Tessa felt Alaric tense. "And if I refuse, then you both die." Light flooded the room suddenly, and Tessa gasped. There were 4 of them, all pale-skinned and white-haired like Alaric, all dressed in black that seemed to absorb the light. They moved with predatory grace, circling the kitchen like wolves around wounded prey. The one who had spoken stood directly before them, his eyes a paler shade of red than Alaric's. "This human means nothing to you, Alaric. She is beneath your notice. Surrender yourself, spare her life, and accept your judgment with dignity." "No." Alaric's voice was flat, final. "No?" The pale vampire's eyebrows rose. "You would die for a human you met mere minutes ago?" "I would die before I submit to a council that values tradition over truth," Alaric replied. "You wanted me gone because I questioned the old ways. Because I believe our laws regarding humans are cruel and outdated. This was merely your excuse." The pale vampire's smile was cold. "Perhaps, but the result remains the same. You are outnumbered, wounded, and defending a fragile mortal. There is no escape, Alaric. Surrender with grace." Tessa's mind raced. She could feel the tension in Alaric's body, coiled and ready to fight despite the odds against them. These creatures would kill him, and then they would kill her to tie up the loose end. Unless... What if he wasn't defending a fragile mortal? She heard herself say. Every vampire in the room turned to look at her. Alaric's hand tightened on her arm in warning, but Tessa pushed forward, stepping out from behind him despite his attempt to hold her back. "Your laws forbid vampires from loving humans," she continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "But what about humans who serve vampires? Your kind must have human servants, right? People who work for you during daylight hours?" The pale vampire's eyes narrowed. "What is your point, human?" "My point is that I'm not some random victim. I'm claiming sanctuary as Alaric Thorne's servant." Tessa had no idea if what she was saying made any sense in vampire law, but she pressed on. "Which means harming me would be harming his property, and even a deposed king has some rights, doesn't he?" Silence fell. The pale vampire studied her with new interest, then turned his gaze to Alaric. "Is this true? Have you bound this human to your service?" Alaric's jaw clenched. Tessa could practically feel him weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, Tessa Brennan is under my protection as my bonded servant. Harming her would be a violation of the covenant of sanctuary." The lie hung in the air between them. Tessa had no idea what a bonded servant actually meant, but apparently it was enough to give the other vampires pause. "Show us the mark," the pale vampire demanded. Tessa's heart sank. Mark? What mark? She saw Alaric's expression shift, saw him preparing to fight his way out, and made a split-second decision. She turned to face him, tilting her head to expose her neck in what she hoped looked like practiced obedience. "My king," she said softly, praying he would understand. Alaric's eyes widened fractionally. Then his hand rose to cup the back of her neck, and he leaned in close. His lips brushed against her ear as he whispered, "Forgive me." His mouth moved to her throat, and Tessa felt his teeth pierce her skin. The sensation was nothing like she expected. There was a moment of sharp pain, quickly swallowed by something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her veins, a feeling of connection so intense it made her gasp. She felt Alaric's presence in her mind, his ancient strength and his carefully hidden sorrow, his fierce pride and his terrible loneliness. And beneath it all, she felt his absolute determination to protect her, no matter the cost. He pulled back after only a moment, his lips stained red. Tessa swayed, and his arm came around her waist to steady her. She could feel something on her neck now, a tingling sensation where his teeth had been. "The mark is given," Alaric said, his voice rough. "She is mine. Harming her is harming me. Will the council add violation of the covenant to my list of crimes?" The pale vampire studied them both, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gestured to the others. "We will report this development to Lord Cassius. But know this, Alaric. A bonded servant does not spare you from judgment. It merely delays your execution until the proper protocols can be observed." He turned toward the door, then paused. "You have 3 days to settle your affairs. Then you will present yourself to the council for trial. If you run, the human dies slowly." They left as silently as they had come, melting into shadows and disappearing. The apartment fell quiet except for the sound of Tessa's ragged breathing. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, her hand rising to her neck. Alaric released her carefully, stepping back as though she might shatter. "I marked you as mine. It is a bond that ties your life force to mine. Other vampires can sense it, which means they cannot harm you without violating one of our oldest laws." He turned away, running a hand through his white hair. "It was the only way to save you. But I have also bound you to me, and that bond cannot be easily broken." "What does that mean?" Tessa asked. "What happens now?" "It means you will live as long as I do," Alaric said quietly. "You will age slowly, far slower than normal humans. You will be able to sense my emotions, my location, my well-being. And I will be able to sense yours." He finally turned to face her, and there was such regret in his crimson eyes. "I have stolen your humanity, Tessa. I have chained you to a creature of the night without your permission, and I am profoundly sorry." Tessa touched her neck, feeling the strange new awareness humming beneath her skin. She could sense him, she realized, could feel his presence like a warm weight in the back of her mind. And beyond his regret, she felt something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. "You said you have 3 days," she said slowly. 3 days until this trial. What happens then?" "They will find me guilty and execute me," Alaric replied simply. "The council has already made their decision. This trial is merely ceremony. Then we have 3 days to change their minds." "Tessa," he said her name like a prayer, like a plea. "There is no changing their minds. I defied them. I chose mercy over law. In their eyes, that makes me weak and dangerous both." "Then we run," Tessa said. "You said yourself you're being hunted, so we disappear. Leave the city, leave the country if we have to. Find somewhere they can't find us. They will always find us. And when they do, they will make an example of us both." Alaric moved closer, and Tessa saw the weight of centuries in his expression. "I am 800 years old. I have ruled the Northern Territory since before your great-grandparents were born. I have made enemies and earned their hatred through countless decisions, countless battles. There is nowhere I can run where my sins will not follow." "So what, you're just going to give up?" Tessa felt anger rising, hot and fierce. "You're going to let them execute you for the crime of being merciful?" "I am going to spare you any further suffering," Alaric replied. "I will use these 3 days to prepare a petition to the council, requesting that you be released from the bond after my death. With luck, they will grant it, and you can return to your normal life." "Normal?" Tessa laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "You think I can go back to normal after tonight? After learning vampires are real? after being bonded to their king? She stepped closer, jabbing a finger against his chest. You said this bond ties my life force to yours. What happens to me if you die? Alaric's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Tessa said quietly. So even if they grant your petition, there's no guarantee I'll survive your execution, which means running is our only real option. I will not drag you into a life of hiding and fear. You already did, the moment you chose my window as an escape route. Tessa met his eyes, refusing to back down. We're in this together now, whether either of us likes it. So stop being a noble idiot and help me figure out how we survive this. For a long moment, Alaric simply stared at her. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger, almost human. You are remarkable, he said softly. Truly. I'm terrified and running on adrenaline, Tessa corrected. But I'm also practical. Now, you said you ruled the Northern Territory. That means you must have allies, people who are loyal to you. Can we contact them? Perhaps. Alaric moved to her window, gazing out at the city lights. My second-in-command, Victor, would stand with me if he could, but the council will have already imprisoned or executed those closest to me. What about the vampire you refused to execute? Mikhail, you called him. Hidden, if he has any sense. The council will be hunting him as well. But if we could find him, Tessa pressed, if we could get him to testify that you were right to show mercy, would that help? It would prove nothing the council doesn't already know, Alaric replied. They do not care about mercy or justice. They care about maintaining their power, and I threatened that power by suggesting our laws might be wrong. Tessa chewed her lip, thinking. There had to be a way out of this. Had to be some angle they weren't seeing. What about other territories? She asked. You said you're the king of the Northern Territory. That implies there are other territories, other vampire rulers. Would any of them help? Alaric turned from the window, interest flickering in his eyes. Perhaps. The Eastern Territory is ruled by Lady Ravenna. We have been allies in the past, though I have not spoken with her in some years. But reaching her would be dangerous. The council will be watching for any attempt I make to contact other rulers. Can you reach her without the council knowing? There are ways, old ways, requiring old magic. Alaric's expression grew thoughtful. But I would need components I no longer have access to. Certain herbs, certain objects of power, and time to perform the ritual. Make a list, Tessa said, moving to grab a pen and paper from her junk drawer. We have 3 days. Let's use them. Over the next hour, Alaric dictated a series of items while Tessa wrote furiously. Some were things she could get from an occult shop or herbalist. Others were more exotic, requiring contacts in the supernatural community she'd had no idea existed until tonight. This is insane, Tessa muttered, looking at the list. Moonstone dust, blessed silver, root of wolfsbane, tears of a willing sacrifice. Where am I supposed to find tears of a willing sacrifice? Those are my tears, Alaric said quietly. The sacrifice of my crown, my power, my life, given willingly for the cause I believe in. Tessa looked up at him, seeing the truth in his face. He really was willing to give up everything for what he believed was right, for mercy, for love. We should start with the easier items, she said, pushing aside the sudden swell of emotion in her chest. There's an occult shop about 10 blocks from here. They might have some of this stuff. It's past midnight, Alaric observed. Will they be open? Only one way to find out. They left her apartment together. Alaric dressed once more in his blood-stained coat. Tessa had thrown a jacket over her own clothes, very aware of the mark on her neck and the strange new awareness thrumming through her body. She could feel Alaric beside her, his presence in her mind like a second heartbeat, steady and strong. The streets of Chicago were quieter at this hour, but not empty. Tessa led the way to the occult shop, a narrow storefront wedged between a tattoo parlor and a laundromat. To her relief, lights glowed in the windows. A bell chimed as they entered, and a woman looked up from behind the counter. She was probably in her 60s with long gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened as they landed on Alaric. Well, she said slowly. I thought I felt something unusual in the air tonight. The vampire king himself in my humble shop. To what do I owe the honor? You can see what I am, Alaric said. It wasn't a question. I'm a witch, honey. Seeing is what I do. The woman turned her gaze to Tessa and her eyebrows rose. And you're marked by him. Fresh marked, too, by the look of it. That's quite the story there. We need supplies, Tessa said, pulling out her list. Quickly, if possible. We're on a deadline. The witch took the list, scanning it with knowing eyes. Summoning circle components, old magic, dangerous magic. She looked up at Alaric. Who are you trying to reach? Lady Ravenna of the Eastern Territory, Alaric replied. Ah. The witch moved through her shop, pulling jars and boxes from shelves with practiced efficiency. Heard the council declared you unfit to rule. Heard they're hunting you for treason. You heard correctly. Also heard you refused to execute a vampire who fell in love with a human girl. Heard you told the council to their faces that love shouldn't be a death sentence. The witch set her items on the counter, meeting Alaric's eyes. That takes guts, or stupidity. Haven't decided which yet. Probably both, Alaric admitted with a slight smile. The witch laughed, a sound like wind chimes. I like you. Here's your supplies. No charge. Consider it my contribution to the revolution. Revolution? Tessa asked. Honey, the vampire world has been stuck in the dark ages for centuries. About time someone shook things up. The witch bagged the items, then pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. Take this too. It's blessed water mixed with essence of silver sage. If any vampire tries to track you through magical means, sprinkle this around your circle. It'll muddy your trail. Why are you helping us? Alaric asked quietly. The witch's expression softened. Because 30 years ago, I fell in love with a vampire. The council found out and executed him in front of me as punishment. Said I'd corrupted him, turned him from his true nature. Then they erased his name from all vampire records, like he never existed. She met Alaric's eyes, her own bright with old pain. So yeah, I'm helping you, because it's past time someone stood up to those ancient bastards. Tessa felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry for your loss. Me too, honey, me too. The witch pushed the bag across the counter. Now get out of here before someone notices, and Alaric, give them hell. I intend to, Alaric replied. They left the shop with their supplies, moving quickly through the darkened streets. Tessa could feel eyes on them occasionally, glimpses of pale faces in the shadows that disappeared when she tried to look directly at them. We're being watched, she whispered. Yes. The council wants to know what I'm doing with my 3 days. They expect me to flee or to beg for mercy. They will not expect me to reach out to Lady Ravenna. Will she help us? I don't know, Alaric admitted. Ravenna is ambitious and cunning. She may see this as an opportunity to weaken the council's power, or she may see me as a lost cause and refuse to involve herself. He glanced at Tessa as they walked. You should know that if she refuses, we have no other options. I will go to my trial, and you will need to run as far and as fast as you can. I'm not leaving you, Tessa said firmly. Tessa, no! She stopped walking, turning to face him on the empty sidewalk. You marked me. You bound your life to mine. That wasn't just about saving me from the council's assassins, was it? The bond goes both ways. I can feel you in my head, feel your emotions, which means you can feel mine too. Alaric's jaw tightened. Yes. Then you know I'm telling the truth when I say I'm not leaving you. Tessa stepped closer, tilting her head back to meet his crimson gaze. I don't know why I care what happens to you. I don't know if it's the bond or if I'm just losing my mind. But I do care, and I'm not going to run away while you face execution for doing the right thing. For a long moment, Alaric simply looked at her. Then his hand rose, his fingers cool against her cheek. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you chose mercy over law. I know you're willing to die rather than submit to injustice. I know you regret binding me even though it saved my life. Tessa covered his hand with hers. That's enough for me. You are going to destroy me, Alaric murmured. not through cruelty or violence, but through this impossible goodness. You are going to make me hope again, and hope is the most dangerous thing a condemned man can have. Good, Tessa said. Hope means fight, and we're going to need all the fight we can get. They returned to her apartment and spent the next several hours preparing the summoning circle. Alaric worked with quiet intensity, drawing intricate symbols on her living room floor with chalk and crushed moonstone. Tessa helped where she could, following his instructions to place candles at specific points and mix herbs in precise measurements. "You've done this before," she observed, watching him work. "Many times. Communication between territories is difficult, given we cannot use modern technology without risking council surveillance. The old magics are slower but more secure." "How does it work?" "I will enter a trance state and project my consciousness across the distance between us. If Ravenna is willing, she will meet me on the astral plane, and we can speak without fear of being overheard." He glanced up at her. "It is draining. When I wake, I will be weak for several hours. Then we'll need to do it somewhere safe. If the council is watching, they might attack while you're vulnerable." "My thoughts exactly, which is why I propose we find somewhere outside the city to perform the ritual." Alaric sat back on his heels, surveying his work. "Do you know anywhere isolated? Somewhere we could go without being easily followed?" Tessa thought for a moment. "My uncle has a cabin about 2 hours north. He barely uses it anymore since his knee surgery. I have a key." "Perfect. We'll leave at dusk tomorrow. I need to rest and regain my strength before attempting the ritual." Alaric stood, swaying slightly. The wound in his side had healed to a thin red line, but she could see the effort it had cost him. "You need blood," Tessa said quietly. "I will manage. You're barely standing, and you said yourself you'll be drained after the ritual. You need to be at full strength." She moved closer, tilting her head to expose the mark on her neck. "Take what you need." "Absolutely not." Alaric stepped back, his expression horrified. "I have already taken from you once. I will not make you my feeding stock." "I'm not offering to be your feeding stock. I'm offering to help keep you alive." Tessa met his eyes steadily. "You said the bond ties my life force to yours. Doesn't that mean my blood would be particularly nourishing?" "It means your blood would be intoxicating," Alaric replied. "Drinking from one's bonded servant creates a euphoria unlike anything else. It is addictive, dangerous, and I will not risk harming you further." "You won't harm me. I trust you." "You shouldn't." But his eyes had fixed on her throat, and Tessa could see the hunger there, carefully controlled but undeniable. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "If we're going to survive this, you need to be strong. So stop being stubborn and feed." For a heartbeat, Alaric didn't move. Then his hand rose to cup the back of her neck, and he leaned in close. His breath was cool against her skin as he whispered, "Tell me to stop and I will. Always." Then his teeth pierced her throat. The sensation was overwhelming. Tessa gasped as warmth flooded through her, the bond between them flaring bright and hot. She could feel everything he felt. The rush of power as her blood filled him, the exquisite pleasure of feeding from a bonded source, and beneath it all, a desperate tenderness that took her breath away. He held her carefully, supporting her weight as he drank, and every pull of his mouth sent shivers down her spine. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were brighter, his posture stronger. He licked his lips, clearing away the last traces of blood, and Tessa felt her knees go weak at the sight. "That was—" she started, then trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Yes," Alaric agreed, his voice rough. He steadied her gently, then stepped back as though touching her any longer would break his control. "Thank you. I am in your debt." "We're in this together," Tessa reminded him. "No debts between us." The rest of the night passed in strange domesticity. Alaric cleaned up the ritual components, carefully packing them for transport, while Tessa made coffee and tried to process everything that had happened. Vampires were real. She was bonded to their king. She had just let him drink her blood and liked it. Her life had officially crossed into territory so weird she had no frame of reference. "You should rest," Alaric said eventually. "Dawn is coming, and I will need to shelter soon." Where will you go? Your bathroom has no windows. I will rest there if you permit it. Tessa thought about the vampire king sleeping in her bathroom and nearly laughed. That's fine. I'll wake you at dusk. Tessa, he caught her hand as she moved past him. What you did tonight, helping me, trusting me, it was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Can't it be both? His smile was small, but genuine. Indeed it can. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart skip. Sleep well, and dream safely. Tessa retreated to her bedroom, but sleep was impossible. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling Alaric's presence in the back of her mind. She could sense him settling into rest, his consciousness dimming, but never fully disappearing. The bond between them hummed constantly now, a connection she couldn't ignore even if she wanted to. What was she doing? She'd known this man for barely 12 hours. She'd let him bite her, tie their lives together, and now she was planning to run away with him to summon another vampire ruler. It was insane, reckless, completely unlike her usual careful, practical self. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face as he'd spoken about mercy and love. She felt his regret when he'd marked her, his determination to protect her even at cost to himself. Whatever else Alaric was, he was genuine. And in a world that suddenly included vampires and blood magic and ancient councils, his honesty felt like the only solid thing she could hold on to. Dawn came, and Tessa felt the moment Alaric slipped into true sleep. The bond muted, his presence fading to a gentle whisper at the edge of her awareness. She finally dozed off, exhausted, and woke late in the afternoon to her phone ringing. It was her mother. Tessa Marie Brennan, where were you last night? I called 3 times. Sorry, Mom. I was dealing with some things. What things? Are you in trouble? Do you need money? Your brother said he saw you walking around past midnight with some strange man. Tessa, you know better than to... Mom. Tessa cut her off gently. I'm fine. I'm helping a friend. Everything's okay. You sound tired. Are you eating properly? You're not working yourself too hard at that coffee shop, are you? Tessa closed her eyes, feeling a pang of homesickness. I actually got fired yesterday. What? Oh, honey, that's terrible. Come home. We'll help you figure things out. You don't need to be alone in that awful city. Chicago's not awful, and I'm not alone. She glanced toward the bathroom, feeling Alaric begin to stir as dusk approached. Look, I have to go. I'll call you in a few days, okay? Tessa. Love you, Mom. Bye. She hung up before her mother could launch into another round of worrying, guilt settling in her stomach. Her family would be frantic if they knew what was really happening, but what could she tell them? Sorry, can't make Sunday dinner, busy helping a vampire king overthrow his council. Alaric emerged from the bathroom as full dark fell, looking refreshed and strong. The wound in his side had vanished completely, leaving only smooth, pale skin. Ready? He asked. Tessa grabbed her keys and the bag of ritual supplies. Let's go. They took her ancient Honda, driving north through increasingly rural landscape. Tessa had called her uncle from a gas station, spinning a story about needing a quiet place to work on a writing project. He'd been delighted to let her use the cabin, no questions asked. The cabin itself was small but well-maintained, nestled in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. Tessa unlocked the door while Alaric surveyed their surroundings with a critical eye. Isolated, defensible, good choice. He carried the supplies inside, already moving to clear space in the main room for the ritual circle. They worked together in comfortable silence, rebuilding the summoning circle with more care this time. The symbols needed to be perfect, Alaric explained, or the connection would fail. Tessa watched his hands move with precise grace, drawing lines that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. You said you've lived 800 years, she said eventually. What was it like, being king all that time? Lonely, Alaric replied without hesitation. Power isolates. The more authority you wield, the fewer people will speak to you honestly. Everyone becomes a petitioner or a threat. He glanced up at her. Until you. You have treated me as neither since we met. That's because I didn't know you were a king when I met you. You were just a bleeding man in my kitchen. Perhaps that's why I find you so refreshing." He returned to his work, his expression thoughtful. "I have not been just a man in a very long time. It is strange. Also, freeing." "Do you want to go back?" Tessa asked. "If we win this somehow, if we convince the council or Lady Ravenna helps us, do you want to be king again?" "I don't know," Alaric admitted. "I took the throne out of duty, not desire. I was strong, so I ruled. That is how it has always been among our kind. But I am tired, Tessa. Tired of enforcing laws I no longer believe in. Tired of watching my people suffer for arbitrary traditions." He finished the final symbol and sat back. "If I survive this, I think I would like to simply exist for a while. No crown, no responsibility, just peace." "That sounds nice," Tessa said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You would be giving up your normal life to be with me. Your family, your friends, your chance at a human future. You realize that? I realize I'm already bound to you. I realize I'll age slowly and live far longer than normal. I realize my life stopped being normal the moment you came through my window." Tessa moved to sit beside him on the floor. "But I also realize I don't want to go back, even if I could." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because you make me feel brave," Tessa said simply. "Because you're fighting for something that matters. Because when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before." She reached out, taking his cold hand in hers. "Maybe it's the bond talking. Maybe I'm delusional, but I want to help you. I want to be part of whatever comes next." Alaric's fingers tightened around hers. "You humble me. Good. You're a king. You probably need humbling." He laughed, a genuine sound of delight that filled the small cabin. Then, slowly, he lifted his free hand to her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch feather light. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Tessa's heart skipped. "Yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips met hers, they were cool and soft and perfect. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but Tessa felt it all the way to her bones. The bond between them flared bright, and she could feel what he felt. Wonder and desire and a desperate hope he was trying so hard to contain. She kissed him back, her hand rising to tangle in his white hair, and for a perfect moment the danger and fear and impossible situation all fell away. There was only this, only him. Only the connection growing between them with every heartbeat. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alaric rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot promise you safety," he murmured. "I cannot promise you a future. All I can promise is that I will fight with everything I am to protect you." "Then that's enough," Tessa replied. They prepared for the ritual as night deepened around them. Alaric stripped off his shirt and positioned himself at the center of the circle, sitting cross-legged with his hands resting on his knees. Tessa lit the candles one by one, following his instructions exactly. "Once I begin, do not break the circle no matter what happens," Alaric said. "My body will be here, but my consciousness will be elsewhere. I will be vulnerable. If anyone attacks, wake me immediately." "How do I wake you?" "Blood. Call my name and give me your blood. The bond will pull me back." Tessa nodded, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "How long will you be gone?" "Minutes or hours. It depends on whether Ravenna answers the call and what she has to say." He met her eyes across the circle. "Do not be afraid. I will return to you." "I'm holding you to that." Alaric smiled. Then he closed his eyes and began to speak in a language Tessa didn't recognize, old words that seemed to resonate with power. The candle flames flickered and grew, casting wild shadows across the walls. The symbols on the floor began to glow with pale light. Then Alaric went perfectly still, his breathing slowing until it was barely perceptible. Tessa waited, her heart pounding. The cabin was silent except for the whisper of wind in the pines outside. She kept her eyes on Alaric, watching for any sign of distress, feeling the muted bond between them like a thread stretching away into darkness. Minutes passed, then an hour. Tessa's legs cramped from standing still, but she didn't dare move. The candles burned steadily, the circle held, and Alaric remained motionless at its center. Then she felt it, a presence approaching through the trees. Tessa's head snapped toward the door, every instinct screaming danger. She could sense them now, multiple vampires moving through the night, closing in on the cabin. They'd been followed after all, or tracked through some means she didn't understand. She looked at Alaric, still deep in his trance, utterly defenseless. The vampires were almost at the door. Tessa made her decision. She grabbed a knife from the cabin's kitchen drawer and returned to the circle, slicing her palm without hesitation. Blood welled up, dark and red. "Alaric," she called, letting drops of blood fall onto his lips. "Come back, we have company." The effect was instantaneous. Alaric's eyes snapped open, glowing crimson in the candlelight. He moved with blurring speed, rising from the circle and pulling Tessa behind him just as the cabin door exploded inward. 4 vampires entered, and Tessa recognized the pale one who had confronted them in her apartment. His smile was cold and satisfied. "Did you really think we wouldn't track you?" he asked. "Did you think the council would simply let you scheme and plot?" His gaze fell on the glowing circle. "A summoning ritual. How quaint. Who are you calling, Alaric? Lady Ravenna? Lord Constantine? Did you truly believe any of them would risk the council's wrath to save you?" "Did I?" Alaric's voice was calm, deadly. "Or did I already speak with Ravenna and secure her support?" The pale vampire's smile faltered. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Or are you simply afraid to find out?" Alaric stepped forward, and despite being outnumbered, despite having just been ripped from his trance, he radiated absolute authority. "I was king for 8 centuries. I know every secret, every alliance, every old grudge the council has tried to bury. Do you really think I wouldn't use that knowledge? The council has already decided your fate." The council made a decision without considering all the variables. That was foolish. Alaric's eyes narrowed. "Tell them this. Lady Ravenna of the Eastern Territory has agreed to hear my case. She has invoked the right of territorial review. The council cannot execute me until Ravenna has rendered her judgment." Tessa felt her heart leap. He'd succeeded. He'd actually reached Ravenna and convinced her to help. The pale vampire's expression darkened. The right of territorial review hasn't been invoked in 300 years. Because the council has grown complacent and arrogant, they forgot the old laws still exist. Alaric smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Ravenna remembers, and she is very interested in examining why the council is so eager to execute a king for showing mercy. Lord Cassius will not stand for this. Lord Cassius has no choice. If he moves against me before Ravenna's judgment, he violates the ancient accords between territories. That would mean war." Alaric's voice dropped to a growl. "Now leave. You have your message. Deliver it." The pale vampire stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he and his companions backed toward the door. "This isn't over, Alaric." "No," Alaric agreed. "It's only beginning." They left, melting into the darkness. Tessa sagged with relief, and Alaric caught her, steadying her gently. "You did it," she breathed. "You actually convinced her." Ravenna is pragmatic. She has long chafed under the council's restrictions, and this gives her leverage. He examined her bleeding palm with a frown. "You cut yourself to wake me." "They were coming. I didn't have time to be careful." Brave and foolish in equal measure. But his tone was fond. He lifted her hand to his mouth, his tongue tracing the cut. Tessa shivered as warmth spread from the point of contact, and when he pulled back, the wound had closed completely. "The bond allows me to heal you, just as your blood strengthens me." "Convenient. Occasionally." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you for waking me. If they had caught me in the trance, I would have been helpless." Tessa leaned into his embrace, letting herself take comfort in his solidity. What happens now? You said Ravenna agreed to hear your case. When? Where? 3 nights from now, in the Eastern Territory. There will be a formal assembly of vampire rulers and council members. Ravenna will examine the evidence and render judgment on whether the council was justified in deposing me. He pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes. It will be dangerous. The council will send their best to argue against me, and there are those who would prefer I simply disappear before the assembly can take place. So we need to survive 3 more nights. Yes, and we need to build a case strong enough to convince not just Ravenna, but the other rulers who will attend. Alaric's expression grew thoughtful. I need to find Mikhail. His testimony about falling in love with a human and my choice to protect him is the foundation of my defense. Can you reach him the same way you reached Ravenna? No. Mikhail is young and has not learned the old magics. I will need to search for him manually, he sighed. Which means returning to the city and risking another confrontation with the council's forces. Then we'd better be smart about it. Tessa moved to extinguish the candles, her mind already working through logistics. Do you know where he might hide? He has a human lover, a woman named Claire. I know her address. Then that's where we start. They left the cabin as dawn approached, driving back to Chicago in the pre-dawn darkness. Alaric directed Tessa to a neighborhood on the south side, older homes with small yards and chain-link fences. There, he said, pointing to a modest 2-story house. Claire lives there. If Mikhail has any sense, he's with her. They parked down the street and approached carefully. The house was dark, no lights showing. Alaric tested the front door and found it locked, then moved with supernatural grace to check the windows. Something's wrong, he murmured. I sense no life inside. Could they be sleeping? Mikhail would sense my approach. He should have woken by now. Alaric's expression grew grim. I'm going in. He moved faster than Tessa could follow, a blur of white and black that disappeared through a 2nd-story window. Moments later, the front door opened from the inside. Come, Alaric said quietly, but prepare yourself. It's not pleasant. Tessa stepped inside and immediately understood. The living room was destroyed, furniture overturned and blood spattered across the walls, not the thick vampire blood she'd seen before, but bright human red. Claire, Alaric said softly, kneeling beside a body covered with a sheet. Dead perhaps 12 hours. She was drained completely. Oh, God! Tessa pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. The council did this? No, this was meant to look like a vampire feeding gone wrong. The council wants humans to believe we are all monsters. What better way than to have us act like monsters? He stood, fury radiating from him in waves. They killed her to draw Mikhail out, or to punish him for defying them, perhaps both. Where is he? Fled, if he has any intelligence. Alaric moved through the house, examining each room. In the bedroom, he found a note scrawled on paper. I know what you're trying to do, it read in shaky handwriting. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for me. I'm going to the council to confess. Maybe if I submit, they'll spare you. Fool, Alaric growled. Noble, loyal fool. We have to stop him, Tessa said immediately. He wrote this hours ago. By now he's already at council headquarters, already confessing. Alaric crumpled the note in his fist. He's throwing himself on their mercy to save me, and they will grant him none. Then we go get him, storm the headquarters, demand his release. That would be suicide. Council headquarters is the most heavily defended location in the Northern Territory. Even as king, I could not simply walk in and take what I wanted. But he's your evidence. Without his testimony, you have no case. I know. Alaric stared at the note, his expression bleak. Then, slowly, determination hardened his features. But there is one person who might help us. One person with the authority to demand Mikhail's presence at the assembly. Ravenna? Yes. If she formally requests his testimony, the council must produce him. They cannot refuse without admitting they have something to hide. He pulled out a phone, old and battered. I can call her directly now that contact has been established. It will alert the council to our location, but we have no choice. He dialed while Tessa kept watch at the window. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky pink and gold. Alaric spoke quickly in that ancient language, his tone urgent. The conversation lasted perhaps 2 minutes. When he hung up, his expression was cautiously hopeful. Ravenna has agreed to formally request Michael's testimony. She's sending the demand to council headquarters now. They will have to bring him to the assembly. Will they hurt him before then? They will not dare. If Michael arrives at the assembly bearing signs of torture or coercion, it will undermine the council's entire position. Alaric moved to the door. "We need to leave! The council will have tracked this call." They hurried back to the car, but as Tessa reached for her keys, a blade pressed against her throat. "Alaric Thorne," a new voice said, cold and female. "How kind of you to make this easy." Tessa froze. She could feel the silver blade burning her skin, could see Alaric's expression shift to pure rage. "Release her, Seraphine. Give me one reason why I should." The woman holding the blade, Seraphine, leaned close enough that Tessa could feel her cool breath. "You're a traitor and she's your weakness. The council wants you both dead." "The council cannot touch me. Lady Ravenna has invoked the right of territorial review." "So I heard. Clever. But the review only protects you until the assembly. It says nothing about your bonded human." The blade pressed harder, drawing blood. "What if you arrived at the assembly alone? What if your little human had a tragic accident before you could use her as evidence of your supposed reformation?" Alaric's hands clenched. "Touch her, and I will destroy you." "Empty threats. You're outnumbered and weakening by the moment. Dawn is breaking, Alaric. Soon you'll have no strength to fight at all." Seraphine laughed. "This is justice. You betrayed us for love. Now watch love die." "Wait!" Tessa forced the word out despite the blade at her throat. "Before you kill me, answer one question." "How bold. Very well, human. Ask. Do you truly believe love should be a death sentence?" Silence. Then Seraphine's laugh, bitter and cold. "Love is weakness. Love is how humans die and vampires fall." "Or maybe love is why we fight," Tessa replied. "Maybe love is worth dying for, worth living for." She met Alaric's eyes across the distance between them. "I barely know him. We've had less than 2 days together. But I would rather die standing with him than live safely without him. Because he's fighting for something that matters. And if you kill me to punish him for that, then you're exactly the kind of monster he's trying to prove you're not." Another silence, longer this time. Then, impossibly, the blade withdrew. "You are either very stupid or very brave," Seraphine said quietly. "Perhaps both." She stepped back, and Tessa turned to see her properly for the first time. Another white-haired, pale-skinned vampire, beautiful and dangerous, with eyes like frozen amber. "I cannot defy the council openly, but I can be slow in reporting your location, slow enough that you might escape." "Why would you do that?" Alaric asked warily. "Because I had a human lover once, 200 years ago, and the council executed her for the crime of loving me." Seraphine's expression was carved from ice. "I learned to obey after that. Learned to suppress any hint of humanity. But I never forgot her." She met Alaric's eyes. "You have 1 hour before I report you were here. Use it wisely." She vanished into the shadows, leaving them alone on the street. Tessa's legs gave out, and Alaric caught her, holding her steady. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking her throat where the blade had cut. "I'm fine. Just scared." Tessa looked up at him, seeing the terror slowly fading from his face. "She was going to kill me." "Yes." His arms tightened around her, and I was helpless to stop her. "If you had not spoken, if you had not reached whatever humanity still exists in her heart, you would be dead." "But I'm not. We're both alive." She pressed her face to his chest, feeling his arms come around her protectively. "What do we do now?" "We survive. We reach the assembly, and we make sure your words tonight are not wasted." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. "You were magnificent. I was terrified. Yes, but you spoke anyway. That is the definition of courage." He kissed her forehead. her cheeks, finally her lips. The kiss was desperate and relieved, and full of promises neither of them could quite make yet. When they finally pulled apart, dawn had fully broken. Alaric hissed as sunlight touched his hand, his skin immediately reddening. "We need shelter," Tessa said quickly. "Now." She drove them to a motel on the edge of the city, paying cash for a room with blackout curtains. Alaric collapsed on the bed as soon as they were inside, his strength fading rapidly. Tessa closed the curtains and locked the door, then sat beside him. "Will you be all right?" she asked. "Yes. I simply need rest." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. "Thank you for saving my life. Again. We're keeping count now?" "We are when the score is so heavily in your favor." His eyes drifted closed. "Sleep, Tessa. We have 2 nights until the assembly. We should rest while we can." Tessa lay down beside him, still fully clothed, and felt his arm come around her waist. The bond between them pulsed gently, comforting and constant. Despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the impossibility of their situation, she felt safe here in the dark with him. "Alaric," she whispered. "Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you." Silence. Then his arms tightened, pulling her closer. "I know I am falling in love with you, and it terrifies me more than any council or execution could." "Why?" "Because I have lived 800 years without truly caring whether I survived. Now, suddenly, I want desperately to live, because dying would mean leaving you, and I cannot bear that thought." Tessa rolled over to face him, their noses nearly touching in the darkness. "Then we'd better make sure we both survive." "Yes," he agreed. "We had better." They slept through the day, wrapped around each other, the bond between them keeping watch even as they rested. When night fell again, they rose together and prepared for the next phase. "We need to reach the Eastern Territory," Alaric said. "Ravenna's domain. The assembly will take place in her stronghold." "How far is it?" "Too far to drive in the time we have. We'll need to fly, which means public airports and cameras and too many ways for the council to track us." "What about a private plane? If we had money." "I have money," Alaric interrupted. 8 centuries of accumulated wealth invested rather cleverly. The problem is accessing it without alerting the council's watchers." Tessa thought for a moment. "What if we don't access it directly? What if we have someone else access it for us?" "Who?" "Your second in command. Victor. You called him. You said he'd stand with you if he could. Maybe he already is." Alaric's eyes widened. "You think Victor is waiting for a signal?" "I think anyone loyal to you would be watching for any sign you're still fighting, and hiring a private plane under his name would be a pretty clear signal. It could also be a trap. The council could have turned him or imprisoned him. Only one way to find out." Tessa pulled out her phone. "How do I reach him?" Alaric recited a phone number from memory. Tessa dialed, her heart pounding. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a deep voice answered. "Who is this?" "My name is Tessa Brennan. I'm calling on behalf of Alaric Thorne." Sharp intake of breath. "Is he alive?" "Yes. And he needs your help." She explained quickly about the assembly, the need for transport, and the danger they were in. Victor listened without interrupting. "Tell Alaric I never believed the council's lies," Victor said when she finished. "Tell him the Northern Territory is fracturing. Half the vampires here believe he was right to show mercy. The other half follow Cassius out of fear, not loyalty. Can you help us reach the Eastern Territory?" "I can. There's a private airfield 30 miles northwest of the city. I'll have a plane fueled and ready by midnight, and I'll be on it myself. It's past time I stood with my king in person." Gratitude flooded through Tessa. "Thank you. Thank Alaric for finally giving us something worth fighting for. The old ways are dying. It's time we built something better." They reached the airfield just before midnight, driving through empty industrial areas to a small runway lit by a handful of lights. A sleek jet waited, and beside it stood a tall vampire with white hair braided down his back. "Alaric," Victor said, bowing his head. "My king." "Victor." Alaric clasped his shoulder. You risk much by helping me. I risk nothing compared to what you're risking, and I'm not the only one. There are others who wait for your word to move against the council. We must be cautious. Open rebellion would mean civil war, and our kind has seen enough blood spilled. Then what do you propose? I propose we change the laws, peacefully if possible, by force if necessary. Alaric gestured to the plain. But first, we must survive the assembly. They boarded the jet, a luxurious thing with leather seats and dark wood accents. As they flew through the night, Victor briefed them on the state of the Northern Territory. Cassius rules through fear, he explained. He has executed 3 vampires suspected of sympathizing with you, but each execution has turned more of the population against him. There are whispers of resistance, of vampires refusing to follow orders. Who leads this resistance? No one yet. They wait for you to return. Alaric shook his head. I am going to the assembly to defend my choice, not to raise an army. But if the assembly finds in your favor, if Lady Ravenna declares the council's actions unjust, will you not return to reclaim your throne? I don't know, Alaric admitted. I am tired of ruling, Victor. Tired of enforcing laws I no longer believe in. Then change the laws. Be the king who reforms our kind. Victor's voice was passionate. You have the authority, the power, and now the cause. Michael and his human lover, your choice to protect them, it has lit a fire among our people. Use it. Tessa watched Alaric's face, seeing him struggle with the weight of what Victor was proposing. Then she reached out and took his hand. You don't have to decide tonight, she said softly. First, we survive the assembly. Everything else comes after. Alaric squeezed her hand gratefully. Wise counsel, as always. They landed in the Eastern Territory as dawn approached. Ravenna's people met them at the airfield, an escort of 4 vampires who led them to a convoy of black cars with tinted windows. Lady Ravenna provides shelter and protection until the assembly, one of the escorts explained. You are guests in her territory now. The council cannot touch you without violating the ancient accords. They were driven through the countryside to a massive estate, more mansion than castle, but still imposingly grand. Ravenna herself waited on the steps, a tall woman with white hair coiled in an elaborate crown and eyes like chips of green ice. Alaric Thorne, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. You have caused quite the commotion. I seem to have a talent for it, Alaric replied, bowing slightly. Lady Ravenna, thank you for invoking the right of territorial review. Do not thank me yet. I invoked the right because it serves my purposes, not out of sentiment. Ravenna's gaze shifted to Tessa. And this is your bonded human? The evidence of your supposed reformation? This is Tessa Brennan, Alaric said firmly. My bonded servant, yes, but also my partner, my counsel, and the bravest person I have ever known. Ravenna's eyebrows rose. High praise. Let us see if she lives up to it. She gestured toward the mansion. Come. You have 1 day to prepare your case. The assembly convenes tomorrow at dusk. Every major vampire ruler will attend, as well as the council members. Your performance will determine not only your fate, but potentially the future of our kind. No pressure then, Tessa muttered, and was surprised when Ravenna laughed. I like her. She has spirit. Ravenna led them inside, into a world of dark luxury and old power. Your rooms are prepared. Rest, strategize, and pray to whatever gods you believe in, because tomorrow you face judgment. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Alaric worked with Victor to outline their argument, while Tessa tried to understand the complex politics at play. Apparently there were 5 major territories, each ruled by an ancient vampire. Ravenna in the east, Alaric in the north, Lord Constantine in the south, Lady Morgana in the west, and Lord Damien in the central territory. The council consisted of elder vampires appointed from each territory, supposedly impartial, but in reality heavily influenced by territorial politics. Ravenna will vote in your favor, Victor explained. She benefits from weakening the council's absolute authority. Constantine is unpredictable but respects strength. If you show no weakness, he might support you. Morgana follows the council blindly. She will vote against you. Damien is ambitious and cruel. He will vote whichever way grants him the most power. So we need Constantine's support, Tessa summarized. Or we need to convince enough of the assembled vampires that the council overreached. The ruler's votes carry the most weight, but a strong showing from the general population could sway the undecided. How do we sway a room full of ancient vampires? With truth, Alaric said quietly. With evidence that the old ways cause more harm than good. With Mikhail's testimony and our bond as proof that love between human and vampire need not end in tragedy. Will Mikhail even be there? Ravenna's demand was clear. The council must produce him or admit they have harmed him. Either way, we win a point. Night fell, and Tessa helped Alaric dress for the assembly. He wore formal clothing from another era, black and silver, that made him look every inch the king he was. His white hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, and his crimson eyes burned with determination. "You're beautiful," Tessa said softly. "As are you." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that these past days with you have been the most meaningful of my 800 years. You have made me feel human again, in the best possible way. We're going to win," Tessa said firmly. "We have the truth on our side. Truth is not always enough, but it is what we have, so we will wield it as best we can." He lifted her chin with one finger, his touch gentle. "No woman of mine cries," he growled softly. "So do not weep for me, no matter what judgment comes." Tessa blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. "I'll try. That is all I ask." They walked to the assembly hall together, Victor at their side and Ravenna leading the way. The hall was enormous, carved from stone and lit by thousands of candles. Vampires filled the space, hundreds of them, all pale and beautiful and deadly. At the far end, 5 thrones stood on a raised platform. And before the thrones, in a space clearly meant for the accused, stood Mikhail. He looked terrible, thin and haunted, his clothes torn. But he was alive, and standing beside him, to Tessa's shock, was a young woman with dark hair and frightened eyes. "Claire," Tessa breathed, but she was dead. We saw her body. "A trick," Victor murmured. "The council faked her death to draw out Mikhail. They needed him as a warning, an example of what happens to vampires who defy the old ways." Alaric strode forward, and the assembled vampires fell silent. He moved with absolute confidence, head high, every inch the king despite lacking his crown. He stopped before the thrones and bowed, a gesture of respect but not submission. "I am Alaric Thorne, formerly king of the Northern Territory. I come before this assembly to answer the charges against me and to demand justice." Lord Cassius emerged from the crowd, tall and cold, with eyes like winter frost. "You come before us as a traitor and a heretic. You defied the council's direct order. You chose a criminal's life over the law. There is no defense for such actions." "Then hear my crime," Alaric replied, his voice carrying through the hall. "I refused to execute Mikhail for falling in love. I looked at a young vampire who had found genuine happiness with a human woman, and I could not bring myself to kill him for it. If that makes me a traitor, then I am guilty, but I am not sorry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Cassius's expression hardened. "The law is clear. Vampires do not love humans. We feed on them, we use them, but we do not love them. To do so is to weaken ourselves, to make ourselves vulnerable. The law is wrong." Alaric's words rang out like a bell. The law was written centuries ago, when our kind hid in shadows and feared discovery. But the world has changed. Humans have grown stronger, more numerous. We can no longer simply take what we want without consequences. We must adapt or perish. "Adapt?" Lady Morgana spoke from her throne, her voice dripping with disdain. "You mean submit. You mean become weak, like them." "I mean survive. I mean find a way forward that does not require us to be monsters. Alaric gestured to Michael and Claire. Look at them. A vampire and a human who found love despite all the laws and threats and violence our kind uses to keep them apart. They harmed no one. They threatened nothing except our pride. And for that, you wanted them dead. They broke the law, Cassius insisted. Then the law is unjust, and I will not enforce injustice. Alaric's gaze swept the assembly. How many of you have lived centuries watching the world pass by? How many of you are lonely, isolated, reduced to hunting in the dark and feeding on strangers? Is this the existence we want? Or can we imagine something better? He speaks sedition, Morgana hissed. He speaks truth, Ravenna countered from her throne. Our laws have not changed in 500 years. Perhaps it is time we reconsidered them. Lord Constantine stirred, his massive frame leaning forward. You offer no alternative, Alaric. Only criticism. What would you have us do? Open ourselves to humans? Risk exposure, persecution, war? I would have us begin a dialogue. I would have us establish treaties, agreements. There are humans who know of our existence. Some hunt us, yes, but others might be willing to coexist if we proved ourselves capable of restraint. Alaric's voice grew passionate. We are not mindless beasts. We are intelligent, powerful, capable of reason and compassion. Why must we act like monsters? Because we are monsters, Lord Damien said coldly from his throne. That is our nature. To pretend otherwise is foolishness. Is it? Alaric turned to Tessa, extending his hand. She took it, stepping forward to stand beside him before the entire assembly. This is Tessa Brennan, my bonded servant. She is human, fragile by our standards. Powerless. I met her 3 nights ago when I fled through her window seeking escape from assassins. She had every reason to fear me, to call the authorities, to drive me away. Instead, she helped me. She tended my wounds. She risked her life to wake me from a summoning trance when enemies approached. She has stood by me through every danger, every threat, asking nothing in return. He lifted her hand, displaying the mark on her neck for all to see. I marked her to save her life. I bonded her to me because it was the only way to protect her from those who would kill her simply for being near me. And in these past 3 nights, I have come to love her more deeply than I thought possible for one such as I. If that makes me weak, then I am weak. But I am also happier than I have been in 800 years. The hall was utterly silent. Tessa felt every eye on them, vampires judging, assessing, calculating. Then Mikhail stepped forward. I fell in love with Claire 2 years ago, he said, his voice shaking but determined. I knew the law. I knew the danger. But she made me feel alive for the first time since my turning. She gave me hope, laughter, a reason to exist beyond hunting and hiding. When the council discovered us, they demanded my execution. Alaric refused. He said love should not be a death sentence. He risked everything to protect us, and now he stands here facing punishment while Claire and I live free. That is not justice. That is sacrifice. Claire spoke next, her voice small but clear. I don't understand your laws or your politics. I'm just a human who fell in love with someone unusual. But I know what cruelty is. And executing someone for choosing mercy over violence is cruel. If your kind truly is better than human, prove it by being better than we are. Show compassion, show wisdom, don't kill what you fear. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, vampires in the crowd began to murmur. Tessa heard snatches of conversation. She speaks well. Alaric always was honorable. Perhaps the council does overreach. Lord Constantine rose from his throne, his voice booming through the hall. I have lived 900 years. In that time, I have seen empires rise and fall, seen humans grow from primitives with clubs to masters of technology we cannot hope to match. Alaric is right. The world has changed. If we do not change with it, we will be swept away. He turned to the council. I vote to reinstate Alaric Thorne as king of the Northern Territory, and I propose we establish a committee to review our laws regarding human interaction. The old ways served us well once, but their time has passed. Ravenna stood next. I vote to reinstate Alaric Thorne and support Lord Constantine's proposal. Lady Morgana shook her head. I vote to uphold the council's judgment. Alaric has shown himself weak and unfit to rule. Lord Damien stood last, his expression unreadable. The entire hall held its breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, he spoke. I have no love for Alaric Thorne. We have been rivals for centuries, and I would rejoice to see him fall. But I rejoice more in the thought of weakening the council's stranglehold on our kind. They have ruled through fear and tradition for too long. It is time for new blood, new ideas. I vote to reinstate Alaric Thorne, and I warn the council, your days of absolute power are ending. 3-1. Alaric was reinstated. The hall erupted in noise, vampires shouting approval or outrage in equal measure. Lord Cassius stared at Alaric with undisguised hatred, but he could do nothing. The vote had been cast, the judgment rendered. Ravenna raised her hand, and silence fell. Alaric Thorne, you are hereby restored to your position as King of the Northern Territory. The charges against you are dismissed. Further, a committee shall be formed to review and potentially reform our laws regarding human interaction. This assembly is concluded. Victor let out a whoop of victory, grabbing Alaric in a fierce embrace. Michael and Claire rushed forward, both of them thanking Alaric through tears. And Tessa simply stood there, relief washing over her in waves so strong she felt dizzy. They had won. Against all odds, they had actually won. Alaric turned to her, and the joy in his face was like sunlight breaking through clouds. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, and kissed her deeply. The bond between them sang with happiness, relief, and love so profound it made her chest ache. We did it, she whispered against his lips. We actually did it. You did it, he corrected. Your words, your courage, your absolute refusal to give up. You saved me, Tessa Brennan. In every way a person can be saved. Then I guess we're even, she replied, smiling through tears she could no longer hold back. Because you saved me too. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind. Alaric returned to the Northern Territory with Tessa at his side, and Victor was right, the territory had fractured in his absence. But seeing him reinstated, seeing the Assembly's support for reform, brought unity back. Vampires who had hidden their doubts about the old ways came forward, speaking openly about the need for change. Cassius fled before he could face justice for faking Claire's death and other crimes. Let him run, Alaric said. Let him hide in whatever dark corner would take him. They had better things to do than chase one bitter old vampire. The Committee to Reform Human-Vampire Relations met monthly. Progress was slow, but it was progress. Treaties were drafted, regulations established. Vampires like Michael and Alaric, who wished to maintain relationships with humans, were given protections and guidelines. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Tessa moved into Alaric's home, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city that blended old-world elegance with modern comfort. She learned what it meant to be bonded to a vampire king, learned the weight of his power and his responsibility. But she also discovered the man beneath the crown, the Alaric who laughed at her jokes and held her through nightmares and looked at her like she hung the moon. 6 months after the assembly, on a cool autumn evening, Alaric led her to the estate's gardens. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light across carefully tended roses and ancient oaks. There is something I need to tell you, he said, taking both her hands in his. Tessa's heart skipped. That sounds serious. It is. Perhaps the most serious conversation we have ever had. He took a breath, unnecessary for one who didn't truly need to breathe, and met her eyes. The bond between us was created in haste, under duress. I marked you to save your life, and you accepted because you had no choice. But now we have choices. Now we have time. And I want you to know that you are not trapped. What do you mean? The bond can be broken. It is difficult, painful, and would require ancient magic. But it can be done. You could return to a fully human life. Age normally, live without the weight of vampire politics, find someone human, someone who could give you daylight and normalcy, and all the things I cannot. His voice was steady, but Tessa felt his fear through the bond, sharp and terrible. "I love you enough to let you go if that is what you want." Tessa stared at him, this impossible man who had turned her world upside down. Then she started laughing. "You are the most noble, most dramatic, most ridiculous vampire king in existence," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Do you really think, after everything we've been through, after changing your entire world's laws, after building a life together, that I want to leave? I think you deserve the choice. Then hear my choice." Tessa stepped closer, pressing her hand to his chest. "I choose you. I choose this life, this bond, this ridiculous, impossible love we have. I don't want normal. I don't want daylight romance and picket fences. I want you, for as long as we both exist." Tessa. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I love you, Alaric Thorne. All of you. The king and the man, the vampire and the heart beneath the monster. I love you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of forever promises. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I had something planned," he murmured. "A speech, but you have utterly destroyed my composure." "Good, you're too composed anyway." He laughed, the sound pure and joyful. Then, slowly, he knelt before her. From his pocket, he produced a ring, old silver set, with a crimson stone that matched his eyes. "This ring has been in my family since before I was turned," he said quietly. "My mother gave it to my father when they wed, and he gave it to me before I left home to seek my fortune 800 years ago. I have carried it ever since, waiting for someone worthy of it." He looked up at her, his crimson eyes bright with emotion. "Marry me, Tessa Brennan, not because the bond requires it, not because of politics or duty. Marry me because I love you and I cannot imagine eternity without you." Tessa's vision blurred with tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, warm despite the cool metal. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle while she laughed and cried and held on tight. They were married 1 month later, in a ceremony that blended vampire tradition with human custom. Victor stood as Alaric's witness, and Tessa's younger brother, shocked but supportive, stood as hers. The wedding took place at midnight in Ravenna's estate, with vampires and humans both in attendance. Michael and Claire came, as did dozens of vampires who had supported Alaric's reforms. When Alaric lifted Tessa's chin with one finger during the ceremony, looking into her eyes with such love it stole her breath, he whispered, "No woman of mine cries, unless they are tears of joy." "These are definitely joy," she whispered back. They exchanged vows written in both the old language and English, promising to stand together through darkness and light, through centuries and change, through everything eternity might bring. And when Alaric kissed his bride, the assembled crowd, vampire and human alike, erupted in cheers. The years that followed were not always easy. Change never is. There were vampires who rejected the reforms, who fled to remote territories rather than adapt. There were humans who feared and hunted vampires despite the treaties. But slowly, carefully, a new world emerged. One where love between human and vampire was no longer a death sentence. One where understanding, however fragile, replaced blind hatred. Alaric ruled the Northern Territory with wisdom gained from his near execution, and Tessa stood beside him as both queen and counsel. Together, they navigated politics and prejudice, building bridges between worlds. 5 years after their wedding, on a quiet evening when the first snow of winter fell outside, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. "It shouldn't be possible," the vampire physician said, examining her with wonder. "The bond must have changed something fundamental in your biology. This child will be unique, neither fully human nor fully vampire." Alaric held Tessa's hand through the explanation, his expression caught between joy and terror. "Are you afraid?" he asked her later when they were alone. "Terrified," Tessa admitted, "but also excited. We're creating something new, Alaric. a bridge between our worlds made flesh. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, and they named her Felicity for the happiness she brought into their lives. She had Tessa's dark hair and Alaric's pale skin, and her eyes shifted between human brown and vampire crimson depending on her mood. She could walk in daylight without harm, but possessed vampire strength and grace. She was extraordinary. 3 years later, they had a son, Xavier, with white hair and Tessa's smile. Then another son, Xander, who was quieter but no less beloved. Their family grew, each child unique, each one proof that love between human and vampire could create something beautiful rather than monstrous. As Tessa aged slowly, her lifespan extended by the bond, she watched the world continue to change. Vampire-human relations improved. More vampires came forward, seeking the same happiness Alaric and Michael had found. More humans opened their minds to the possibility of coexistence. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. On their 20th anniversary, Tessa and Alaric stood in the same garden where he had proposed, their children playing nearby under Victor's watchful eye. "Do you regret it?" Alaric asked quietly. "Giving up your normal human life for this chaos?" Tessa looked at their children, at the life they had built together, at the world they were slowly changing. Then she looked at her husband, this ancient vampire king who had risked everything for mercy and found love instead. "Not for a single moment," she replied. Alaric smiled, and in that smile was 800 years of loneliness finally ended, of hope reborn, of a monster who had discovered his humanity through love. He lifted her chin with one finger, a gesture that had become their signature over the years. "No woman of mine cries," he murmured, though Tessa's eyes were dry and bright with joy. "No tears today," she agreed, "only happiness." He kissed her as the sun set and the moon rose, as their children laughed and played, as the world turned on its axis and changed bit by bit. And in that perfect moment, surrounded by love they had fought so hard to protect, they were simply two people, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, who had chosen each other and built something beautiful from that choice. Their story would be told for generations, a tale of courage and mercy and love that refused to die, the vampire king who chose compassion over law, the human woman who stood beside him and changed the world. Together, they had rewritten the rules. Together they had proven that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. And together they would face eternity, hand in hand, heart to heart, bound not by magic alone, but by the choice they made every single day to stay, to fight, to love. It was enough. It was everything. And it was theirs.